Hello and welcome to NewsX. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching Focal Length, your exclusive spotlight on the most pressing issues that are shaping the future of our world. Today we turn our focus to a range of global conflicts and developments that have gripped the international community, from the possible resurgence of ISIS in the wake of the overthrow of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. These issues pose serious challenges to regional stability and global security. We'll also look at the impact of the recent ceasefire agreement and hostage deal in Gaza and the broader implications for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. From the long-standing conflicts in the Philippines affecting the global and social stability of the nation to the political turmoil in Germany, we'll examine the most pressing global conflict trends and discuss how international community can address these challenges. To help us navigate these complex issues, we're joined by Mr. Florian Neuhof, who will bring deep insight into the geopolitical, social and humanitarian implications of these developments. Thank you for joining us. In the light of the recent overthrow of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, how do you assess the potential for an ISIS resurgence in the region, and what implications might this have for neighbouring countries like Iraq?
Well, I think the danger levels of the prospect of an ISIS resurgence has certainly risen with the collapse of the Assad regime, not because the Assad regime was doing anything to contain ISIS, but because there are prisons in northern Syria run by the Kurdish regional government, separatist government, which are now exposed due to the instability that have been caused by the collapse of the regime. And even more so because Donald Trump has now curbed all funding to USAID, which has been funding the prison guard salaries. And as a consequence of that, some of these guards have now gone home, leaving the prison underguarded. And that raises the prospect of thousands of ISIS militants who have been kept in jail in these prisons, escaping, and thus feeding in the insurgency that is latent in that part of Syria. Also, because as a consequence of the Assad collapse, fighting has flared up between the Kurds and rebel factions supported by Turkey, which increases instability, and instability is always a bad thing when it comes to fanning the flames of insurgency. If there is a strong uptick in ISIS activity and a resurgence in Syria, that could easily spill over into Iraq, which has been doing quite well in containing the ISIS threat over the years, but nevertheless hasn't managed to eradicate all of the structures, underground structures that exist, especially in northern Iraq, in the rural areas there. So yes, there is potential for an ISIS resurgence. I do not foresee it being as threatening as it was back in 2014 when the terror group overran vast swathes of both countries, but it certainly could lead to an increase in violence. Yes.
Considering the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, what are the key factors sustaining the hostilities, and how are the international community's response influence the situation?
Well, the conflict is essentially ongoing because Putin is determined to grind it out, to take huge casualties and expend huge amounts of material and resources to take more land from Ukraine. It is unrealistic for him to assume that he would take over the entire country, but he's still looking at the eastern provinces, Donbass and Donetsk, and he's still making gains. And that is not showing any signs of decreasing. That's made possible, in my opinion, because even though the West has been delivering a lot of arms and material help to Ukraine, it's never really delivered enough to effectively stop Putin and make the war unfeasible for him. So Putin has always had an incentive to keep going because ultimately Ukraine wasn't equipped enough to truly resist him. That could shift radically to the worse if Trump decides to cut all aid from Ukraine, that would make Ukraine's position totally untenable and force President Zelensky to the negotiation table to effectively concede those territories that have been lost and even some that haven't been lost to Russia. And that while that would bring peace, it would be a painful loss to Ukraine and a terrible precedent for in Europe because it would effectively encourage Putin towards future aggression. And the lesson learned here is if you start a war, you get away with it and you gain territory. So while that might cause peace in the short term, it would certainly be a destabilizing factor in the long term.
With the recent ceasefire agreement and hostage deal in Gaza, what are the immediate challenges facing the region and how might these developments impact the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Well, as you know, the most recent development is Trump proposing that the US take over the Gaza Strip, to own the Gaza Strip, to expel all its residents and redevelop it to make it into the Riviera of the Middle East. That is nothing less than ethnic cleansing on a massive scale. There are over 2 million inhabitants in this strip, which, according to Trump's ideas, would then be distributed across neighboring Arab countries who have no intention of letting that come to pass because they don't want to destabilize their own societies through the influx of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of refugees. You never know with Trump what is word and what are words and what will have consequences. So we'll have to watch this space. The current ceasefire, previous to that, was obviously something that would give rise to hope that there could be a more lasting peace in the Gaza Strip and a return to not normality for its residents, but at least a stop to the killing. There are so many uncertainties now in Gaza and in Israel. It doesn't look like the Netanyahu government is ready to scale back its intentions, which ultimately amount to the wholesale expulsion of Palestinians in the Palestinian territories, whether that be Gaza or the West Jordan or the West Bank. The question is, how far will the international community let them go? What can they do to prevent that? And how Trump will. Well, Trump, by his own reckoning, is totally on board with the idea of Israeli expansion in those areas. So that's certainly not a good development for Palestinians. And if these things come to pass, if there is mass expulsion in Gaza, in the West Bank, that will thoroughly destabilize the region because, as I just mentioned, there will be a mass influx of refugees in neighboring countries who do not have the resources and the political stability to cope with that.
What factors have contributed to the emergence and spread of the QAnon conspiracy theory in Germany, and what impact has it had on the country's political landscape?
Well, the QAnon conspiracy is a symptom of a wider malaise, namely of right-wing conspiracy theories, which are in tune with the growing right-wing populism that you see in the entire Western world, whether it's the US and to maybe a lesser extent still Europe. Interestingly enough, QAnon, which is now greatly diminished as a intellectual force, if you can call it that, was fairly widespread in Germany. I think it had the widest sort of acceptance in Germany within Europe. But that has now been greatly diminished both in the US and in Germany as well. It's been overtaken by other right-wing strands of thought. So that more widely is a growing trend towards right-wing extremism, which you see in German politics. You see it now in the elections, where the far-right AfD party are polling at around 20%. A few weeks ahead of the German elections. That's unprecedented. and they will have they are a growing force in German politics. Unfortunately, there's a strong debate about migration in Germany, which feeds into the growth of right-wing populism here in Germany. We've had a spate of terror attacks or killings perpetrated by migrants. I think most of which actually didn't have permission to be in Germany at this time, and that's further fueled this drift to the right in German politics. So this will very much influence German politics in the coming years, and it remains to be seen. We will find out soon, come February the 23rd, when the elections are held, how big the influence of the AfD will be going forward.
In your coverage of conflicts in the Philippines, what are the primary drivers of unrest and how are they affecting the nation's political and social stability?
Well, the Philippines is still the main driver of political tension there is the rivalry between the Duterte dynasty, political family, and the Marcos clan, which is currently in power through Bongbong Marcos. They seem to have come to some sort of power sharing agreement prior to the election with Duterte's daughter becoming vice president. She's now been impeached recently, so you expect to see some movement in that situation, and I think this clan rivalry is getting worse, and we'll have to see to what extent that unsettles the political landscape in the Philippines. Generally, the issue of fighting the so-called drugs war, which led to the mass killing of suspected drug users and dealers under the Duterte presidency, that's still going on under Marcos. That he's taken over that policy, and it still seems to be a vote winner for them. Something that causes a lot of bloodshed, but seems to be popular with the electorate. ISIS, as you might know, had a foothold in the Philippines, in the Isle of Mindanao, which has a strong Muslim minority, and that was beaten back a few years back, and actually the main political slash militant movement, the MILF, has come to accommodation with the central government, and they've created a new autonomous region where elections are due to be held, and that actually seems to be a rare example of successful negotiations between an insurgency group and a government that seems to have addressed the worst grievances that this ethnic or the religious minority had to create some sort of peace in that region. So that's a positive development, and it seems to be going in the right direction. So we'll have to see where that takes us.
Based on your extensive experience, what are the most pressing global conflict trends today, and how should the international community address them?
I think you can. The most pressing problem, at least from a Western perspective, to my view, is the rise of right-wing populism. We see it now in the new Trump term. We see it in Europe in every upcoming elections. The right-wing, far-right parties are gaining ground rapidly, and in some cases might, like in France, might be in government soon. That you can argue and discuss and analyze how that came to existence, what created these political forces. An argument that's always, or an issue that's always put forth by these right-wing politicians is migration. Certainly that's happening in every one of these countries. To what extent varies, and to the extent to which that actually is a political, or let's say an economic and social problem, is debatable, but it's certainly been something that's helped extremist populists gain traction in the Western world. So if you take a step back, that's related obviously to globalization, global inequalities, climate change, which is exacerbating these problems. So I guess, well, what to do about that? To somehow stem climate change, to ameliorate global inequalities, would be something that perhaps reduces migration and even manages to quench some of that social discontent that we see here in Europe, which would then in turn maybe rob the right wing of its influence.
Thank you, Mr. Neuhof, for joining us on Focal Length. And with that, it's a wrap. Stay tuned for more discussions on the critical matters shaping our global future.